Great, Claire. It looks like you're struggling with your connection, so thanks for bearing with us and trying to get back in and out. We paused for a bit as Simon joined us, hoping you were going to come back. There you are. So we'll start again. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. We're in a fantastic place in terms of lean OPEX change in business now. Despite 40 years of struggles and reports of failed change and transformation programs, I think personally strongly believe neuroscience has given us some answers we've not had before. So, you know, lean never claims to deal with the people piece overtly, not from a tools and techniques point of view, but you know, it's something that we can specifically address now. So we've got a few slides to guide the conversation. Let's just run through them. Levent, are you able to?
Yes, I will.
I'll keep talking while you're playing with connections. Oh, that's Trevor. Brilliant. So yeah, we're in this great place. We know lean does some fantastic things. OPEX, whatever banner it goes under, we know it started as quality circles, world-class manufacturing, and it's evolved over the years. I think in the early days, as people went back to Japan, learned a bit more about what they hadn't seen to begin with, it back into the package, and you know, kept evolving it. And that allowed us to really build up underneath the continuous improvement side of things and the way we look at the tools and techniques and execute training to improve process and method. And it's been fantastic at eliminating waste and improving flow, production lines, etc., etc. And we've, you know, it's got a fantastic track record across many industries. But we all know, everybody talks about what really isn't sticking, that there's a sustainability problem, and it's reported by all the big boys, McKinsey, the big four, etc., as much as everybody else around the planet. So we know that we've been missing something, and you know, that really, from my point of view and Levent's point of view, is that we've very much focused on one of the two pillars out of the Toyota way, which was the continuous improvement bit that Deming supported with PDCA, and we didn't really have the capacity, the language, the ability to really dig in and understand the respect side of things. And again, that's where I think neuroscience allows us to unpack that a bit more now. So in the absence of that continuous improvement and respect balance, and only focusing on one side of the model, we see this issue that improvements are implemented through a logical technical training point of view, then they fade away. And we've got these huge stats now in the market, you know, around disengagement from Gallup, from about stress being sort of 50% of the workforce. And if you look at productivity trends, at least productivity rate improvement trends over the last 200 years, we're back at where we were in the early 1800s. So as much as we keep putting technology in, and keep developing systems and tools, there's something else that we need to get right that's missing. Yet when we look at Toyota and the abilities they've got and the amount of production output they get for their workforce, I think it's something, the stats are something like 10.1 million vehicles for 370,000 employees, whereas Volkswagen as a comparative is about 9.8 million cars produced per year. Double the workforce, 660,000 employees. So there's definitely something missing, and I think, you know, from our point of view, what the work we're doing, we see that is being explained very clearly through this neuroscience lens. So, you know, we all know that you can have these tools, apply them in different businesses, and get very different outcomes, and it's that underlying bit that we're going to explore a bit today. So I think we can agree that lean optimizes process, and it's good at it. But behavior is an output of brain function, and sometimes introducing tools and techniques and training and technicalities from a logic-based perspective, i.e. do X to get Y and Z will be the outcome, doesn't always work, because people are emotional and they respond in very different ways. So that's the challenge we've got. Lean never claimed to really solve that outrightly from a technical point of view. And that's a bit we can add into the mix now. So Levent, I'm talking away here. Did you want to chip in and add anything to what's been said so far?
Yes, we are emphasizing the fact that
I'll do that.
Change initiatives or lean transformations are mostly failing. But by saying that we are not criticizing tools or the application of tools, it's the opposite. These tools, Lean, Toyota Production System, and alike are necessary for that improvement, continuous improvement. But we are just saying that these approaches are missing something, and that something is causing Lean not to stick, change not to stick. So let's go deeper into that. When we talk in terms of tools, when we think that we change or improve processes, people will comply it. And there's a saying that process drive behavior or systems drive behavior, right? I don't want to say that it is false, but it is also sometimes misleading. Process or systems drive behavior has such a meaning. Clear systems and standards guide people about how to act, right? But sometimes these systems produce some negative signals, pushing people into their defense mode. In that case, when people don't take the ownership of the systems and they just comply with the systems, and as quick as possible, they want to escape from that. They are not taking the ownership of the systems. So we cannot say 100% that systems drive behavior, but when we look at human behavior and human brain and how the behavior is produced by the brain, it is in fact human brain and human beliefs which is driving the behavior. I think we will talk about it more, David, right?
Yeah, thanks, mate. No, it's great framing. It's yeah, we can't get away from the fact, can we, that everything we do, the fact that we're talking now, that I'm using my hands to make these gestures, they're all an output of brain function, and the brain's surviving the environment. You know, let's keep going through the slide packs. I know we've got a few points that will help bring this out. So this is what I was just about to touch on, right? The brain prioritizes safety over efficiency. The brain's one job is to survive efficiently. And we say those two words together, efficiently, because there's a glucose energy component to it, that we have to consume food. Historically, that put us at risk because there were saber-toothed tigers and things, you know, competing for the same food. And that means the brain has evolved to try and keep us safe, but whilst getting that glucose, that source of glucose from carbohydrates. So there's got to be an efficiency aspect to it in ourselves in terms of how we keep safe. So part of that is about how the brain predicts. You know, are we going to be safe in the next few minutes listening to this? You know, are we going to be safe next week because if something changes in the market, etc., etc. The brain's always predicting, and that's the job it's got, to keep us safe by predicting, by utilizing that glucose in a brilliant way. It doesn't care about the efficiency in the workplace, other than if it makes a connection to that and its future safety and its job, you know, in our job, in our lives. So what we believe good looks like in terms of leadership, in terms of process improvement, you know, all of our beliefs, you know, is the boss nice if he shouts because he's disciplined, or is he nice because he puts his arm around our shoulder and congratulates us for a small win, because that's encouraging. Those beliefs frame everything. They frame our perception about what life is like at work. And those beliefs and the thinking that goes with that, the firing of this wiring in our brains that leads to us acting and interacting with the world, triggers this emotional response. And it's that emotional response, which we now know through neuroscience is a big bunch of chemicals, I mean loads of chemicals, and how they move and change around in the brain and the body all the time, which determines how we respond, whether defensively or from an engaged point of view. And when we think about those stats we mentioned a minute ago, mass disengagement, huge amounts of stress, what we're talking about is very low oxytocin levels, very high cortisol levels. And there's real significant and negative detrimental impact of having that bad balance in chemicals in brains for everybody and for the outcomes we achieve as a business. So, I mean, this is the facts. This is what actually happens. Human beings are an output of their brain function, and therefore how they perform and behave at work the origin, the source of that, the root cause of that is brain function. And yet everything we do from a training point of view and a technological point of view, tools and techniques point of view, ignores that, and just like Levent said, just assumes that people will adapt and adjust. But that's not what the brain's designed to do. It's not designed to adapt and adjust to the logic. It's designed to protect us from all the different sensory stimulus that's coming from the world. And that social threat that can come from boss or judgment mechanisms and KPIs that we've not been involved with and don't understand why they're at that level or coming at us from that direction, can trigger that negative defensive response. And that's when we get, what we loosely call resistance to change, disengagement, misalignment. These are all outcomes of brain function. Again, going on, Levent, please get a word in. Did you want to add anything, mate, there?
Yes, number 2 is especially interesting because the change as we introduce may conflict with the beliefs of people. People may think and believe that the change is bringing only difficulties or overloads for them. They may think that it will not be beneficial neither for them nor their work, etc. But not only that, their beliefs shape how they perceive the change. Even we can formulate our thoughts very clearly. We can introduce very simple, objective, clear standards. People may get it negatively, depending on what they believe, depending on what happened in their experience in the past. So we need to keep an eye on their beliefs and what kind of feelings do their beliefs cause before we take any action.
Yeah, I've heard you say it so many times, mate. If you ignore that and just go forward with your plans and ignore, you've lost people at the beginning, haven't you? And that's when we see the problems come out 3 months later, 3 years later. Sometimes in my experience, 10 years later, I've seen it come back to bite a change program in the bum. So I think, this is really the crux of the situation. This is the bit that sits underneath this problem with improvements, some either lasting, sticking, sustaining, whatever word you want to use, and those that don't. When we get adoption, when things genuinely change and it becomes just the way we do things around here, that's because, usually inadvertently, beliefs have aligned. Sometimes it comes down to a couple of good leaders that are great at connection and communication and actually manage to transfer meaning between brains and help other people feel safe in going forwards towards a new future. But that's rare. If you look at Jim Collins' books about good to great, that kind of stuff, he called it level 5 leadership, and he described much of the same traits and found that it was incredibly rare to find these senior leaders that have got these skills and capabilities. The most common situation we see is that we have got different beliefs, we do pull in different directions, and that does look like resistance or drift or whatever you want to call it. It's incredible that it's so obvious once you see it, but we've missed it so systematically forever for the last 40 years of my career anyway. So Levent, anything to say?
Yes, the hidden important thing I think behind this slide is ownership. Sometimes leaders think that the decisions that they are taking, the systems they are creating and standards they are producing are so simple and so straightforward that we don't need to convince anybody. We just need to launch it as quick as possible. But we should never forget that if it's people who will keep these standards alive, we need to know, or we know from experience that nothing goes as planned, right? Especially in projects where human is involved, because human relationships will exist and some changes will happen that will force system, that will try to break the system, right? These are the times we need the ownership and accountability of people. Without their ownership, they will not take the responsibility of solving additional problems that will arise along the way. And without ownership, no project will survive. That's why, even we think it is very simple and straightforward, it's always a good idea to stop and think about or try to understand what they feel about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the conversations we have with so many clients and so often between us, mate, about principle-based practice. You know, if we call principles, values, beliefs, we know they're interchangeable words. If from our language, our point of view, that means brain wiring that fires, right? So you can't have a belief about anything and think about that belief or principle or value unless you've got a wiring pattern. And it's when people have got a consistent and strong wiring pattern, i.e. strong principles, that they all agree on and stick to, and then practice in line with those principles. That's when you get consistency of behavior. That's when trust goes up. Then that's when oxytocin levels rise. That's when you get high performance, because it shifts the chemical balance in the brain. So people do collaborate more because they have got good relationships. They do critically think better. They problem solve more because they can innovate, because the glucose energies allowed to fire the right parts of the brain and not feed that defense mechanism that otherwise is being triggered when they've got to survive their socio-technical environment. You know, the model seems so obvious, like I said, when you see it. But yeah, no, great stuff. I think let's bring it round to what we're doing in the world. And you know, we've been doing this a few years now, and we're getting great and consistent results wherever we go. But we recognise that, you know, what does the Oliver Wendell Holmes saying? I wouldn't give you a fig or a tuppence, I think he might have said, for simple on this side of complexity, but I'll give you my life for simple on the other side of complexity. And when you look at the human brain, yes, it's complex, but when you get into it and find out how it fundamentally works, you can use this simple model and make sense of it all. So if we think of beliefs as wiring patterns, the fact that wiring, those neurons, those cells have to depolarize using chemical, you know, electrical energy from carbohydrates, and I say carbs, but do we need to get this specific? Just to be accurate quickly, in the interest of quality standards, it's potassium, sodium, calcium ions from our foodstuffs that have got a positive charge. That changes the charge in the neuron and allows that to depolarize and build that electrical charge up and send it down the axon. And that's what we call thinking, right? You've got to have neurons firing to think. There is no thought without that process happening. But they can't connect and talk to one another and move that message across the brain without that chemical component. And as we've already established, the chemical mix in your brain determines how you feel, whether you've got high dopamine, GABA, glutamate, serotonin, oxytocin levels, or high cortisol levels, adrenaline, you know, all sorts of things are going on, and there's lots of them. So how we think has a big impact on how we feel, but we can only think based on our wiring patterns. And the output of all of that is how we act. And that's you know, it doesn't need to get much more complicated than that to start reframing the conversation that we have. And you know, the title of this little session is about, you know, the missing conversation. How can you talk about brain function if you haven't got the language to talk about it? You know, but neuroscience comes with lots of really silly words like dopaminergic and mesolimbic pathways and, you know, neurotransmitters and whatever else it might be. We don't need people to become neuroscientists or psychologists. We just need a simple model that allows people to trust that there's science behind it. And that's what we introduce at BTFA. Again, before I move on slides, mate, did you want to chip in with anything there?
Yes, we are becoming out of time, but quickly, this slide also shows us that human behavior is not random. People are not difficult. If you know the mechanism their brains are using to create their behavior, you can analyze why they behave like that. For example, they behave according to their feelings. Human is not rational at all, as this is a false belief. And neuroscience has proven that we act mostly according to our feelings. And people are not born with their belief set. We acquire our beliefs from the experiences we have in our environment. So if you change the environment, you can shift beliefs that will change behaviors sustainably.
Yeah, brilliant. And of course, our own output into the environment is what creates the environment for other people. So it's about our own self-regulation and control and abilities to conduct ourselves. And if we go back to Toyota and Lean, respectfully, right? You know, that's what we've got to try and achieve. So just time check, everyone. We didn't get really going until about nearly 5 past. So I'm going to run over by a couple of minutes here. But we are on the last 2 or 3 slides as well. So just to wrap up today's session, let's get through these. I think, you know, what's been missing from the conversation of continuous improvement, well, neuroscience. I strongly believe it's that people piece in language that the West, and again, this is about Western minds. We're conditioned by STEM-based subjects. We're conditioned by the English language as it's become the dominant language in industry, and the way that that language works and the way it allows us to frame things positively or negatively is what leads to how we approach the world, how we interpret the world. But to dig underneath that, you know, it's the neuroscience, it's the brain that's outputting that language, it's determining how we relate to each other, that we've not really been able to unpack. And the Japanese philosophy that explained it and makes sense in that part of the world didn't translate very well to those brains that are looking for science and facts and data. And that's what neuroscience gives us. It gives us a way to translate the philosophy into science that Western brains can accept very easily. And that's, I think, why we're probably seeing such a massive adoption of what we're teaching in the lean community globally. So, you know, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Lean's great. The tools and techniques are fantastic, whether you prefer to call it lean or TPS, because I know there's a lot of arguments about fake lean. The point is, it was one part of the overall system. It was one half, and arguably you might say it was the Pareto 20%, whereas the people and the belief side of it is the 80%. But even if we go 50-50, it still means we've been missing something. So if we bring them together, then that big global market problem of change not sustaining, not becoming sticky, because people are resistant, misaligned, and disengaged, starts to get resolved. And we do, you know, add these things together, bring in BTFA as an enabler of all the other things we do in the world, and you know, we are going to start to get that sustainable change. So here's a few questions, practical reflection. We all probably have heard of Hansai, so let's do a little bit of it. On the back of this, why don't you go and think about or ask, what do my teams genuinely believe about improvement? Do they go, oh, yawn, here it comes again, we've done this 5 times over in the last 20 years? Or do they go, oh, fantastic, how are we going to make this place better? Because that response is of their brain's output based on their belief about improvement. Ask them, does it feel enabling or threatening? When people hear the next message from the boss about the next step, the next strategy, where we're going to go in the next 3 to 5 years, are they shutting down, or are they going, wow, how can I get involved? You know, it's this emotional response that's going to determine your outcomes. And ask the question, are we changing process and just process alone and expecting just somehow that the brains that are designed to survive that environment are going to stop surviving it and just get on board? Or are we going to think about shifting that belief as well? So there we go. I mean, this is what we're doing. An application, an invitation, book a call, you know, have a chat if you're interested. But we do support everything with what we do through BTFA, culture change, transformation programs, leadership development, and obviously lean, OPEX, project management, change management, etc., etc. So I think that's about it from us. Levent, last words, mate?
Yes, you can think of BTFA as if it's an enabler of whatever you are doing. It makes change stick.
It does, and we're seeing it in practice work time and time again. Thank you, mate. Thanks everyone for joining. Lovely to see you here on the call, and we look forward to the next one about the same time next month. See you then. Cheers. Bye all.
Bye.